Hi everyone, today we're making pie. We are going to make a double recipe of our crust because we're making apple pie with half of it, and then we're going to make a goat cheese and cream cheese onion tart with our other crust. So to make our crust, we have 4 ingredients. Here I have 2 cups of all-purpose flour. If you wanted to make it gluten-free, you could use gluten-free flour. And this is all-purpose. Could you use pastry flour? Yes, it lowers the gluten content. To this, we are going to add half a teaspoon of salt. Okay. I'm gonna take my whisk and just disperse that all over the place. Because one of our crust is going to be used for a savory application, I'm not going to add sugar, but if you wanted to add 2 tablespoons of sugar to this, that would be fine. The next thing we're going to add is butter. Now my butter, I grated, and it's been in my freezer to get really, really cold. Okay, and I like that because I have to work the butter much less. Now, when you're making pie, you have a few options. You could use a stand mixer to make it. You could use a food processor to make it. And I would say if I don't make it by hand, my second favorite method would be using a food processor, okay? And then the other tool you could use to execute that is this. And this is a pastry blender, and that is used to cut the fat into the flour. Now, when it comes to fat, I'm using butter. And the type of fat that people use when making pie crust is a big debate. I like butter because when I bake for flavor. However, one of the drawbacks of using butter is that when it's cold, butter isn't very pliable. When you use shortening, okay, shortening is still pretty cold, or it's still pretty pliable even if it's cold. So that's why people sometimes prefer shortening, and they also say it makes a flakier crust. All right, now you see I haven't even touched this with my hands, and I've got some big chunks, I've got some little chunks. You want about the size of a pea, if not a little bit bigger. So that's what we're going for. When it comes to fat, some people can say to use a combination of fats. So you could use like 80% butter and then 20% shortening. So you get the benefits of easy rolling with a shortening, but you get the flavor on the butter side, okay? You could also use lard. If you wanted to make it vegan, you could use coconut oil. So you do have some options depending on what you do or what you want, all right? And when you're cooking, you cook with what is your preference, all right? You are the chef. All right, again. So 2 cups of flour, half a teaspoon of salt, 1 cup of frozen grated butter. I stir until it's the size of peas, and now I'm gonna add a 1/4 cup of ice water. Okay. And I'm just gonna drizzle that in. And you may need to add a little bit more water, you may not. I think this needs a little bit more. So I'm just gonna eyeball it. I would say that maybe another 2 tablespoons. Just a little bit more. And I'm just kind of smearing it up against the side of the bowl. And maybe one more tablespoon. All kind of coming out the sides of the bowl here. And now I'm going to, and I think I added a little bit too much water. So right here, I have a little bit of plastic wrap, and I'm gonna dump my dough onto the plastic wrap. And because we're making 2 pies, I'm just gonna get one more piece of plastic wrap and we're gonna divide it. So that's about half. This is a bowl scraper, and it's probably my favorite tool, other than a spatula. I love a spatula. And, all right, so because it's a little moist. And then I'm just gonna use my plastic wrap and just kind of smear it into, and I'm just using the palm of my hand to get it into like a hockey puck shape. Because our pan is round, all right? And when our goal is around, we wanna start out with a round. So I don't wanna knead it too much, but as you can see, this dough is full of beautiful flecks of butter that's gonna create a nice flaky crust. And it is a nice round shape. So we're just gonna cover that, and it's gonna go into the fridge for about, I would say minimum half an hour to about 2 hours. Okay. And we're just gonna do the same thing to the other one, and then we're gonna roll it out. All right, so I'm going to shape this, and we'll come back and I'll show you how to roll it. All right, welcome back. So we are gonna work on our apple filling, and that's about 8 cups of apple that we have peeled, cut, and sliced. And I'm gonna add a little bit of lemon juice, and that will help the apples from further oxidizing, and it'll give it a little bit of flavor, which I like. If you wanted even more lemon flavor, you could actually add some lemon zest. Okay. And it looks like I got a little bit of seeds in there, and I don't want seeds. So I'm just gonna pick through it really quick. All right. So to that mixture, I'm gonna add a 1/4 cup of white sugar and a 1/2 cup of brown sugar. You could use all white sugar, but I like the flavor of brown sugar. The recipe that I'm using is based out of King Arthur flour, but with recipes they're used as a guide, so I adapt them to my liking. This is a 1/4 cup of flour that's going to be used as a thickener. If you are gluten-free, you're going to use cornstarch. You're not going to use flour. I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. When it comes to spices, you add the spices that you like and that are to your liking. You could just use cinnamon. You could use, also this is nutmeg, another spice. A little bit of nutmeg goes a long way. This is whole nutmeg, and I grated it on the microplane, okay? So just a little bit. That's all you need. We're gonna tap that out. And then we're also going to add just a pinch of salt, okay? Because remember that salt enhances the sweetness. Again, it's not in the recipe, but it's okay. And we're just gonna mix this until it's combined. And if you like that cinnamon flavor, you could add more cinnamon. If you don't like it so cinnamony, you could adjust it accordingly. Okay. Some people like allspice or cloves. And I think I'm actually gonna add a little bit more cinnamon. So I'm just gonna do a little shake. All right, so with pie, you can make a double crust, which would mean you have pie crust on the top and the bottom. There's a lattice crust, so you have a rolled out crust on the bottom, and then you're gonna cut strips and make a lattice for the top. Or you can do a crumb topping, which is what I prefer. And with my crumb topping here, I have a cup of flour, 1/2 cup of oats, 1/2 cup of brown sugar with, again, a pinch of salt to bring out that sweetness. And some people actually do cold butter with this, but I found that melted butter is just fine as well. So before I add my melted butter, I'm just going to disperse all of my ingredients, all of my dry ingredients first. Before I add my melted butter. And sometimes you're just gonna have to get in there with your hands. That's the best tool. All right. I'm gonna add my melted butter, and I'm just gonna stir to combine until it forms those clumps. And that's what I'm looking for. And then we're gonna crumple this on top, okay? Now, the other thing that you could do with your crust is make a galette. Now, a galette is a free-form pie, which you would just bake on a sheet pan. It's also called a crostata, so in French I would say galette. And all right, so we're gonna roll out our pie crust. I have another sheet of plastic wrap on my counter surface, and I prefer to roll out on plastic wrap because I find that I put less flour, it doesn't stick to my counter, and it's just a little easier. So with my hand, I'm going to pre-roll, if you will. We're just gonna add just a tiny, tiny bit of flour to the top there. Now, when it comes to rolling options, these are some of my fun rolling pins, all right? you have your traditional one. This happens to be part of an art easel that I took apart, and I'm like, oh, I could use that. So sometimes I roll with this. This is something that you would use to roll fondant with. Or guess what? Sometimes you just have a bottle of wine, and if you have nothing else, use your bottle of wine to roll out your pie. You use what you have. So when you're rolling your pie out, you can go from the center out in all directions. So some people kind of like do a little turn. And you can kind of lift your pie crust, or you lift the paper off the pie crust, maybe add just a smidgen. And there's a lot of flour on the sides. I want to get that on top of the pie crust, not smooth that over. And then continue to roll. So the options that you have for baking your pies, you have aluminum, okay? You could use ceramic. You could use glass. I find that the aluminum is best for baking your pies. With glass, you would have to bake at slightly lower temperatures, okay? And with ceramics, I find that the ceramic is just too thick and the heat transfer isn't as effective with pie. Okay, so some people have this like fancy mat, which I do have. I just left it in the basement. And it tells you exactly if it's 12 inches. I'm using a 9-inch pie plate. And you want to make sure that when you put it down, it covers the entire pie by a good inch. And I think I'm there. So I'm going to lift my plastic wrap. Some people take the pie crust and they wrap it around, and we can do that. The rolling pin, actually, I'm gonna add just a little bit. It's sticking on me. So if it's sticking on you, that's okay. If it sticks to me, it's gonna stick to you too. You just add a little bit of flour. That flour is going to be your non-stick surface, and it was a little sticky on the other side, so I'm just going to flip it. And then peel it off a little bit. And you see how it's sticky? And that's okay. It's also because I took it out of the fridge a little premature, and that's fine. And this is showing me that I probably added maybe a little bit too much water, but that's okay. And that it's not cold enough. That's what that's telling me. But it's good that I make mistakes and not perfect, because if it's not perfect for me, that means you could encounter the same concerns. All right. But a little bit of flour. I'm just going to pat that. And if you feel like there's excess flour on the sides, what you can do is just take a brush and brush away that excess flour. All right. So I'm gonna take that. And like I said, you could have rolled it on the rolling pin, but I'm just gonna use my plastic wrap to kind of drape it over the pie crust. And I'm gonna have to reshift it a little bit. So you just kind of lift and let it go into your pie pan. So you're lifting it and letting it go down a little bit. And it's pretty thin on here, but here it's a little bit longer. So I'm just going to use a knife to cut it. And I will kind of attach it. And then you're gonna just lift up your pie crust with your fingers and fold it under. So lift and fold under all the way around. Lift and fold under. And it's pretty thick this way. So I'm just kind of attach it. All right, so now we're going to make a border around. To do that, you're gonna take your two fingers and then your middle finger goes into your two fingers and you just kind of do that all the way around. You could take a fork and just crimp it, or you could do the same thing with a spoon. All right, with our savory tart, we're going to blind bake it. What is blind baking? Well, you are going to take a piece of foil. You're going to put it on top of the pie crust, and then on top of that foil you are going to either put, some people have special pie weights. I don't have special pie weights, so I actually have some dried beans that I use for that purposes. And if you don't have dried beans, you can actually just use rice. Okay, so again, you use what you have. I don't make a lot of pie, so it's not really worth it to me to buy special pie weights. All right, so again, if I was going to blind bake, the foil goes down and then I would pour my beans and then I would bake that at 425 for about 12 minutes, and then at the end of 12 minutes I would remove my foil with my beans and I would continue to bake the pie crust for another 8 minutes, and then I would add my filling that doesn't require as much cooking time. So they're both gonna be done at the same time. All right, so let's finish our apple pie. We are going to fill this up, and it smells delicious already. And when you're baking apple pie, some people have some issues in terms of the bottom crust isn't always cooked. So when you're making an apple pie, you actually want to cook it on the bottom rack of your oven, okay? And in addition to cooking it on the bottom rack, I actually put a sheet underneath it, because sometimes what happens is all of the sugars boil over, and that's fine, but you want those sugars to boil over onto either a piece of foil or again, a sheet pan, so you don't end up having burnt sugar on your oven, and then that could cause a fire, and you want to avoid your accidents. So this is gonna go into an oven that is at 425 degrees for about 15 minutes. And then I'm gonna reduce the heat to 350, and it's gonna bake for another, I would say, 45 minutes. And then some people actually even leave their pie in, so that bottom crust definitely is cooked. There's nothing like a Thanksgiving pie that the top is great, but that bottom crust is soggy. So as you see, I kind of just form a border all around the pie as I drop the crumb topping, and I'm just crumbling it as I go, okay? So that, my friends, is a delicious pie that is ready for the oven. And once it is done, we will show you what it looks and tastes like. All right, our pie is baked, and it was really high, as you can tell. As it bakes, it kind of shrinks down. And I want you to notice that there is some fat that pools on the bottom of the pan, as well as some sugar. That's why it's really important you always line your pie with a thin tray on the bottom, okay? So we are going to cut our pie. And it should be nice and warm. It has cooled. And I like pie, but I don't need a lot of it. So I'm just gonna cut myself a small slice. And you wanna make sure that you cut through the crust. Now you can serve your apple pie with whatever you like. I happen to have some ice cream, some vanilla ice cream that I made. And there is also some pecans. So I'm gonna give myself some pecans, why not? And a scoop of vanilla ice cream. I'm actually gonna try the crust. And the crust is nice and flaky. You have a little bit of that lemony tang, and all of the different apples we put in there, all the different varieties really come through. It's really yummy. Make some pie. You don't have to buy it for Thanksgiving. You can make it yourself. Have a beautiful day. I love you all.